guys, here come the dollies. They got fresh sinkers, hot coffee, and the sweetest smile.
Welcome back to the Clubmobile, everybody. We're so happy to have you joining us today.
Hi, everyone.
And joining us for the second time, coming back, is our friend, Dr. Hattie Hearn.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me back.
Thanks so much for joining us again.
Well, it was so fun the first time. I thought, she couldn't miss up.
We had so much. We did. We had so much fun the first time that we're doing it again.
Yeah.
Yes. Do it over again.
Yes. So if you guys have been keeping up and following along, we had an episode come out a couple of months ago, probably at this point, on war brides and women who traveled from their home and made an entirely new life in America with their GI husbands. So we are going to be following that up with a part 2 and really diving into the war brides of East Anglia and the surrounding air bases, because Hattie, that's your specialty, right? East Anglia and the European theater.
Yep. So my specialism is the 8th Air Force, maybe a bit of the 9th as well, but mainly the 8th, and particularly the social and cultural history of that period, known as the Friendly Invasion.
We know that this was, War Brides is just a tremendous, as a whole, right? It's a tremendous outpouring from post-war, the women that just left home and came over to America. There's a lot of notable women, though.
I think the definition is someone who's married a serviceman or a servicewoman of a foreign nation, and then has gone back to that person's country of birth. So yeah.
What was the whole history surrounding all of it? I know we've been through it, but I would love to get your angle on it as well as our own from our own episode.
Yeah, so, well, the history of it's quite interesting. So obviously in the First World War, we had a lot of American troops coming over to Britain in 1917 once the Americans entered the war. And there were some cases of war brides then, not just with the American soldiers, but also the Canadian soldiers who were here, the Australian soldiers who just infiltrated into London, and suddenly they were very eligible bachelors, really, for a lot of women who wanted to escape 1918 Britain. So that's kind of the first wave of GI brides. But then really it is the Second World War where we see the number of marriages, the number of romances really escalate. And that was just because there were so many foreign servicemen entering Britain. And like I said, again, it wasn't just Americans. There were also a lot of Canadian troops. So even before America entered the war, a lot of British women were marrying Canadians. So it really was kind of a melting pot of different cultures. And as we always say with war, that there's definitely a kind of live for today attitude, because you never know what's going to happen around the corner. So it seemed to be that the perfect kind of laboratory for these relationships to happen, and for romance to blossom. People fell fast and hard for each other. So it's no surprise really that we do see a lot of Anglo-American relationships, particularly with the 8th Air Force, because whilst they're obviously flying missions fairly regularly, they do have a lot of downtime, and they have a lot of leave in places like London. And what do you do when you're on leave? You probably want to get a date, go for a drink for a woman, maybe take it a bit further. So but men tended to have a lot of friendships, and which often were platonic, but often developed into romances with British women, whether that was in the villages and towns surrounding their airbase or in London or other places where they've gone on leave.
Is there what? Go ahead.
Would you agree that in terms of a lot of people marrying very quickly, that a lot of the attitude of the British women was sort of, I want to get away and not live a life my mother lived, in terms of rationing and the Blitz and, living poorly because they had no choice? Do you think they saw life in America as sort of the American dream, and they wanted to go over just to avoid a repeat of what they had just lived through.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. There was definitely this sense that the grass was greener on the other side. These women had grown up, probably if they're in London through the Blitz, but they would have spent a, a lot of their teenage years going through the war, and also seeing, like you said, seeing how their mothers and their grandmothers had lived. Often, if you're from a town or a village surrounding an air base, like the village of Thorpe Abbotts, for example, you're going to be used to a very kind of slower pace of life. That your prospects weren't that great. You're probably going to marry a farm labourer, someone local, and have kids. And for a lot of women, obviously, that was uh, the the life that they wanted to lead. But for a lot of other women, particularly interacting with Americans and all of these other newcomers to the area as well, it wasn't just Americans. You had women coming from cities working on the land with the Women's Land Army. You had troops of other forces as well, RAF. So they kind of got a taste of what their life could be like if they left that village. And for many, America was seen as like the place that they wanted to go to, and that was really as a result of cinema, as well as the music stars of the day. They just came with this sense that America was where it's at, which was going to be the world leader. So they probably have more money if they went to the States. They could have luxuries that there was no way they could afford. But most of all, they could just avoid the dark drudgery of wartime Britain. So a lot of women did think like that, and that may have been in the back of their mind. But I do think that for the vast majority of relationships, they were driven by love. And maybe I'm just an old romantic, but I do get the sense that you wouldn't put yourself through the whole ordeal of marrying an American and then having to wait to go back to America once the war was over if you weren't actually committed and you were actually in love with the guy.
Yeah. We feel the same in sense of being old romantics. It's kind of why I didn't want the answer to be like yes, a lot of women did do that because of the waiting game, and even then the immigration process was insane. Yeah, I'm glad a lot of them married specifically for love. I don't think we had any examples, Gabby, when we did our original episode, and I know Hattie has some, and I'm excited to hear them.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Examples of marriages that didn't go well, or examples of marriages of some of the love. Yeah, okay, yeah.
The nice ones.
Not the positive. Yeah, I managed to gather a bit of a cross section of different marriages. So if you search on the newspaper archives in America, for example, you come up with so many records of British women marrying American forces over there, and often those marriages were recorded in their hometown newspaper back in the States. So you get some great photos and you get some lovely details of the different marriage services. There's just obviously too many to mention. We're talking about sort of 50, 60,000 marriages. But one that struck me, and it's a story we actually tell in the American Air Museum, where I work, is the story of Forrest Dowling. And he joined the war relatively early on. He was American, but he joined the Royal Canadian Air Force and ended up in one of the Eagle squadrons, serving over here. So he was in Britain from 1941, and it was whilst he was at his airbase where he met a young WAF, and I think she had to update his identity card for him, and then love blossomed over the kind of guard room desk, and they ended up forming a relationship, and before long they got married. So that was late 1941, and then in 1942 they had a son, and there was a lot of press at the time about the birth of this child because it was believed he was the first child born out of an Anglo-American relationship during the war, and he was dubbed and he was dubbed an eaglet because his dad was in the Eagle Squadron, which is really cute.
That's so cute.
That's very cute.
And so luckily Forrest Dowling survived the war, and they went back to the States. And Michael now lives in Britain, and he's very proud of his parents and his upbringing and kind of his dual nationality. So that's a really lovely story. It's kind of the start of the story, and it would be one
Yeah.
of the first cases of an Anglo-American marriage. And by the end of the war, you were in the tens of thousands. Um, yeah, and it's something I really didn't think about, the fact that these marriages and these relationships were happening before America even formally entered the war, and with the arrival of the 8th Air Force.
Yeah, because a lot of Americans that we weren't in the war yet at the time that wanted to serve would join with the Royal Canadian Army. That was their
exactly.
that was their ticket overseas to fight.
Yes, yeah. So you had thousands of Americans who were really, really eager to get into the fight,
Yeah.
and they crossed over the border, joined the Royal they joined the Royal Canadian Air Force, and then they often conducted their training in Canada, and then came over to Britain. And there were so many Americans that they decided to form new squadrons specifically for these Americans, and they were called the Eagle Squadrons. And then once America entered the war, members of the Eagle Squadron were given the choice of staying in the RAF or joining the US Army Air Forces. So you see most of them actually end up joining the 8th Air Force. So yeah. So there were a lot of Americans who had been in Britain for quite a long time, relatively speaking, before America even entered the war.
Right, before we even got over there, which is I guess it's a bit of a staggering number that you think that so many people would want to, your country's not in the war, but I'm desperate to go over there and fight because I know that what's happening over there is wrong. So I'm going to go and fight, and I'm going to sign up with Canada, which I guess is as close to America as you could get at the time, right? I'm going to go sign up with Canada and I'm going to fight.
Yeah, and
it's very admirable.
It's very admirable because there was actually a law in place at the time that if you did decide to go over and fight for a foreign country, that you could possibly have your citizenship revoked. So they knew that when they went over there. Luckily, obviously, that wasn't the case because America later entered the war.
Right.
But they and a lot of them did have British ancestry, but then others were just saw what was happening in Europe and wanted to get involved and wanted to do their bit.
Yeah. Which I can completely understand. I think we've read about a couple of instances like that, Gabby. I think when we read Lucky's book, his best friend, he joined the Canadian Air Force, didn't he?
Lucky was going to join the Canadian Air Force, and his mother wouldn't sign or his father wouldn't sign the permission slip for him.
Yeah. And then there was another example in SAS Rogue Heroes, which we've watched, where I've forgotten his name. An American somehow joined the French Foreign Legion, and he ends up with the SAS.
I've forgotten his name as well.
Yeah.
I completely forgot. It was
there's
surprisingly
so many examples.
Yeah. So
do you happen to have any stories of when the brides got on the boat at Southampton to come over to the US? Do you have any
because they didn't start coming over till early 46, right? So America's now vacated, they've gone home, the men, and the women are still there. And I would imagine there's a period of time where they're wondering, am I ever going to get over there, or am I just married to a man now who's an entire ocean away and I'm stuck over here? What do I do?
I can't get there.
Right.
That period of time I think was quite agonizing for a lot of women, because like you said, they weren't able to officially enter the US, or at least they didn't have the means to get over to the US until early 1946, and that was because there was a priority to get all of the returning servicemen back to the US first, which required all of the troop ships, which is a fair reason. But in the meantime, these women were, as you can imagine, wondering what their husbands were up to. They're thinking, oh God, are they still going to want to be married to me? Have they found someone else? What's he going to be like? So their minds are probably kind of turning pretty fast, thinking, have I done the right thing? Maybe having second thoughts. And there was a bit of outrage as well. There was a lot of frustration, and a lot of the women ended up writing to the American government, the British government, trying to expedite this process, because they were getting so impatient and they really thought it was unfair that whilst the rest of the world were moving on with their lives, they weren't able to go and be with their
Right.
husbands and start their new lives in America. There are
Mm.
cases of women smuggling onto ships to get over to the US. So there was one woman who smuggled onto her new husband's troop ship, and she wasn't discovered until she got to the States. And luckily, they didn't deport her, and they let her stay. And then,
Wow.
yeah. So she was clearly very desperate to be with her husband,
Yeah.
which is quite sweet. And there were also a lot of women who decided to go over to the US during the war itself. So they might have got married in 1943, 1944, and rather than wait for the official transportation, they
Right.
decided to just pay their way to get to America, which did come with its
Yeah.
own risks, as we know. The convoys were under attack. There's the U-boat threat was always present during the war,
Yeah.
so making that transatlantic voyage could be quite dangerous. But they decided to do it anyway. And some of these women, their husbands were still serving overseas, so they would then be kind of given an address that said, right, go here, or my mum and dad will meet you off the ship and take you back to their house. So often they ended up setting up their new homes, their new lives without their husbands,
Mm.
and they would have to. Sorry, dogs are barking.
You're fine. Can't hear it.
Yes, so they would have to start setting up their lives without their husbands. And for a lot of women, it was very strange because they were in a completely new environment, a completely new home life, and they were with two older people, their parents-in-law, who they probably didn't have anything in common with. They might have looked at their new bride with some suspicion. So it was a bit of an interesting setup for a lot of those women. But as you can imagine, for some of the women, they were just so desperate to go back to the US, especially if their husbands were in the 8th Air Force and they'd completed their tours of duty and had gone back home maybe like 1944, early 1945. There's no way that they were going to wait until the end of the war before they could go and make that voyage.
I feel like there's also the risk of if they went ahead, like they, went ahead before the end of the war and their husband was still overseas, there's the risk of, well, what if now I'm here and he doesn't come home? It's a very, it's a very, it's a dark thing to say, right? It's, your mind goes there and you're like, well, what if? But it's the reality of the way that the world was that, you could marry him and stay over in England and wait for the end of the war and he could perish, or you could go to America ahead of him and set up house with his mother and father, right? And live with your in-laws. And then you're worried, you're over there and you're worried that, well, is he going to come home? Well, now is he going to come home? What happens if he doesn't? Now I'm stuck here.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. That they must have been worried to make that jump before your husband is back and while he's still in danger. I'm sure there were cases where when the husband didn't come back, and then I guess they would have had that decision whether they would stay, or presumably they would have rights to stay in America or go back to their families. And what I find quite interesting actually is that a lot of the women, or I don't know if it's a lot, but certainly some perhaps more level-headed couples decided not to get married until after the war. They thought, well, let's not rush into things because you might not come home. You might go back to the States and find actually you want to marry an American girl. So in 1946, when you had the beginning of these crossings to take British women over to the States, which quite humorously was known as Operation Diaper Run, because a lot of the women had babies with them. But on the eastbound voyages, so back to Britain, you actually would usually have quite a few American GIs or ex-GIs going back to Britain because they'd decided, yep, I'm going to go back and go and get my girl, we're going to get married. And for a lot of them, they decided that they weren't going to rush into things. They were going to go back to the States and see what happens. And then if they wanted to go ahead, then they'll go back and get married in Britain. So I think that really does dispel the myth. And certainly a lot of the rumours at the time was that these British women were just rushing into things. They weren't thinking it through. It was very much in the heat of the moment. And these marriages may not really be destined to work. And actually, I think a lot of the people at the time were fully aware of what they were getting into. And we do see that as well because the in order to get married, the American soldier would have had to go and get permission from his commanding officer, and the commanding officer would weigh up the couple. They would think, right, well, what's the woman like? Well, how is this going to work? And in some cases, they actually did deny permission to get married. So they had to go through that step first, and then the British wife would be given a book. I think it was called Living in America or something like that, and it had tips on how to set up house in America and what to expect when they got over there. There are also cases in London, so the famous Rainbow Corner, the big Red Cross club. So every week, Rainbow Corner would hold lectures. So they'd have a speaker from each of the different states. So if a woman had married someone from California, they could attend this talk by a Californian speaker who would talk them through exactly what California was like, what they could expect with the weather, the culture, how to do your grocery shopping, how much you should be spending on different things. So for a lot of women, they did actually get quite good preparation before they went over there. So yeah, certainly wasn't rushed in every case.
Right.
Yeah.
Were there any instances of American men who married British women who decided to stay in the UK after the war?
That's a really good question, and it's something that I have been able to find examples of in the past, but in preparation for today, I thought I'd go and have a look, and I couldn't find any specific names. And I do know of quite a few Eighth Air Force veterans who did end up coming back to the Britain with their British wives, but that's tended to be a bit later on. In a lot of cases, they would go over to the States, and maybe it wouldn't work out, or when they reached retirement age, they would end up moving back to the UK.
Right.
But I don't know of many examples where they actually decided, no, we're going to make a go of it in Britain. And I suppose that was because the post-war prospects weren't as good as
Right.
going back to America, where potentially they could take advantage of the GI Bill. They could have access to all of the much better kind of welfare services, and it's kind of understandable that they'd choose to go back to the States.
Yeah, it completely makes sense, because
Yeah.
a lot of Great Britain was still being built back up post-war. So many of it had been lost, so much infrastructure had been lost. They were building brand new infrastructure in the post-war years as well. So like the lack of jobs, there was still rationing. When did rationing end? I do know this, but my brain has just completely gone blank. When did
That's
it
a good
end?
question. I'm going to say it's 1952. It was definitely
See,
early
you're not gonna
50s.
eat for a
Wow.
while. Yeah,
Yeah,
Wow.
long
yeah.
time.
And it kind of it eased off in stages. But I think I
Yeah.
think sugar was one of the last things to
Of course.
Yeah.
be unrationed. Yes.
So really, like in terms of that, the prospects are not good.
Right.
No, and wages
Right.
would have been a lot lower as well.
Yeah.
Job
Yeah.
potential, yeah.
I
No,
know
the
that was
reason
something
the
that
reason I asked was because we had just finished reading Spitfires, the book
Yes.
Spitfires, about the American women who flew with the ATA, and there was a number of American women who met British RAF pilots or that were flying with the ATA that got married and stayed. So I was like, oh, I wonder if it, did the men
Maybe the other
decide
way.
to do the opposite? Like, did
Yeah.
it go the opposite way as well? Just,
Yeah.
things that make, things that rattle around in my brain all day.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that there are examples of that, and I'm determined now to dig them out. I know there were examples as well of American women, maybe with the WAC, serving with the Women's Army Corps or even the American Red Cross, obviously not
Right.
military, but still in uniform.
Right.
There are examples of those women marrying British men and going back to America. So I think in total there are about 54 British men who married American women,
More
which
husbands.
isn't that many
Yeah.
really, but yeah.
I think we read in preparation for the first episode of this two-parter, we read that the first voyage was X amount of war brides and one bridegroom, just one
Yes.
lone man.
Just
He's
one
never
fella.
Solitary man.
He's never named or anything, which upset me because I wanted to know everything. Because I was like,
I know,
what did
I'm the
he
same.
do?
Right?
Yeah, I
One
spent ages on
fella.
newspapers.com trying to find reference to this man. Yeah, and I did find a really interesting article, which was from 1944, I believe, and it basically was talking about how a lot of the WACs in Britain were trying to find English husbands. And it made out like they were all on the hunt for love and they all wanted to pick themselves up a nice English gentleman. And apparently,
them.
hundreds of them, which I do not believe, apparently hundreds had sought the help of um, a marriage bureau to try to find
No.
love with English men. But
Matchmaking before
yeah,
matchmaking. I
basically,
love it.
and they said that their biggest complaint was that the English man was too shy and retiring. So
Yes.
I find hard to believe. Yeah, so
See? It's a
um,
lie. It's all a lie.
yeah, and I do think it stinks a bit of sexism because they also did interview
Yeah.
one of the WACs and she was like, I don't know, I know a lot of other WACs and I don't see any of them trying to hook up with English guys. I think we're all quite happy just to get on with the job at hand and win the war, and then
Yeah.
we'll maybe think about all of that later.
Right.
Yeah. So it's quite funny the spin they put on this and the kind of assumption that all women are gonna want to find romance wherever they are in the world, whatever they're doing. Surely love's going to be at the forefront of their mind.
Anything for
Surely
a
they're gonna
headline.
want to be a
Yeah.
Surely they're gonna be a wife and stay in the kitchen and
Yeah,
Right?
rear the children.
Spinning
Of
it that the only,
course.
maybe that the only reason that these women joined the Women's Army
Was to
Corps
find a
was to find
husband and then
love,
it
you
Oh
know.
leads to
yeah, it
Did
definitely
they
domesticity.
join?
insinuates
Like,
that.
why did they join? Like, I could almost just picture like a very 1940s headline, like, women in the Women's Army Corps. Did they join for the right reasons? Like, or did they just join for
Yeah,
love? Like, very, very, more at 10 o'clock.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
More
there
on
was a
this
lot.
at 10.
I guess it sold newspapers. It's a bit of yeah,
Yeah.
sensationalism, and there definitely was that kind of stereotype
Hmm.
that women shouldn't really be in uniform to begin with, and they were a bit of a
Yeah.
novelty
Well.
act. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's funny because they did also, for this article, they talked to some of the British men to get their opinions on maybe why they weren't having relationships with American women. And one guy just said, "Well, they're really they are well groomed. I'll give them that, but their voices are just too annoying. It's just high pitched and nasal, which was a
That's
bit of a burn,
sick.
to be honest."
As the only
Yeah,
American on this call right now, excuse
Yeah, you're
me.
outnumbered.
I'm outnumbered. I'm
you have to take up with this
outnumbered.
guy.
Am
Yeah.
I high pitched and nasally? I don't know.
No, I don't think
No.
so. Not at all. That's rude.
Very
So
rude.
rude.
God.
Yes, I get to be the authority on
Goodness.
that one. That's very rude.
That's very rude. One question I have always been curious about is if you mentioned that some war brides left prior to 1946. Would they have
Mm.
had to pay their own way? And would
Yeah, yeah.
the war brides that left in 46, did they have to pay their own way as well?
Oh,
Or were
yeah.
they just sort of like shuttled
Yeah,
onto a ship with proof of marriage?
Right. Like if you waited till
yeah.
46, was the government covering your travel costs?
Yeah.
No, that's a good question. I know before 1946 they would have had to pay their way. So yeah, often the husband would pay for them to go over
Hmm.
to the US. And I
Yeah.
do believe with the Operation War Bride, Operation Diaper Run, that they did at least have their voyage kind of subsidized for them, and there was a real push to get all of their immigration paperwork sorted so that they'd be ready for that voyage. And once they got to the States, they wouldn't have to go through too much immigration protocol. They could just get on with their new lives. So yeah, I think there was a lot of support from the US Embassy and the American government because they were very aware that they had a lot of disgruntled women, but also a lot of American GIs who'd married, and for them they'd done their bit, they'd fought in the war, they wanted to get on with life, and part of that was obviously having their new wives and in many cases children to come
Right.
live with them in America. So there was a bit of an urgency, even though it didn't all kick off until 1946.
Yeah. I just had the thought of coping with a potentially newborn-ish baby by yourself and being on a
God.
boat for
Oh, I
3 weeks.
know.
It's a
Yeah,
special kind of hell.
Yeah, and for a lot of the sailors, they did complain a bit because they were like, "Oh, well, I joined the Navy to see the world, have a life of adventure, and here I am, like basically manning a creche." They had to like help make
Yeah.
up all the all the formula.
God.
There were crying babies everywhere. Luckily, the mums did all kind of gather together and they did help each
Yeah.
other. So they weren't alone, which was the case for the women who were coming before those official
Yeah, they wouldn't have been by
voyages.
themselves.
I think it's a testament
What
to the
would
strength of the women in that time as
Oh,
well. Like,
absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna get on this boat and I'm gonna go somewhere completely new with my newborn child and hope for the best,
Yeah.
right? I'm gonna make the best of it. Make do and mend, I
Yeah.
guess, in a way.
Yeah.
Keep calm
Oh
and
yeah.
carry on.
Keep calm and
And
carry on.
it
Yes, that's
carries
the
that all
one.
the way through, I
They
feel like.
did. They did.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It was stressful.
do you happen to have any anecdotes of like the reaction of these women's families when they would say, "Hey, I'm gonna leave and I'm gonna go to America," or something along the lines of the women when they got here, how their lives changed?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you see so many different anecdotes. Basically, any social history of the friendly invasion that you read about British women turning around to their parents and saying, "Well, actually, me and Joe are going to get married, and we're going to go back to the States." And the reactions were definitely mixed. I think the first reaction was usually shock and kind of like, "Oh, are you sure you're making the right choice?" A lot of parents were very understanding, and you've got to bear in mind that this was happening so often. And if you look in the parish registers for any church, you're going to in East Anglia, really, you'll see some American British marriages. So it was common for the time, and it really depended on the family. So obviously, a lot of families were very close knit, and it's not like today. Like I know in your case, Winnie, like when you went over to the States, at least you have video calls. You can stay
Yeah.
in touch. But
Yeah.
for these women that they're going over, they might be able to afford a phone call once a year, but they're going to rely on letters. And for a lot of close knit families, particularly if the girl was an integral part of the household, and they're kind of pulling their weight in terms of the household income, or maybe supporting an elderly relative, the loss of that child to go and live overseas was pretty heavily felt.
Yeah.
But then again, for a lot of rural families, they were all too aware that there weren't that many opportunities in the countryside in East Anglia at that time. They'd all lived through this awful Great Depression, the agricultural depression of the late 19th century, early 20th century, where Suffolk and Norfolk were basically had extreme poverty, and it was so hard to eke out a living. So particularly for fathers, they saw this young American with amazing prospects. He could go back to the States, he could go to college, he could get a good job, and he could take this guy's daughter with them. So a lot of them had to put the sentimental side of things to the side and just think, well, actually, probably for my daughter, they are going to have a better life out in the States.
Right.
Yeah. Do you feel the same way now? Because I know a lot of my friends, myself included, married an American. We did it for love, obviously, but I found there's way more opportunity here than I would have had if I'd have stayed in very rural Suffolk. Do you feel like that has carried on over to today, or is it just me looking at where I grew up very side-eyed? Like, there's nothing here. There's nothing for
Yeah,
me. Um,
yeah. No,
yeah,
I totally know what you mean. I think for having grown up in a similar place to you in rural Suffolk, you do grow up and you think, well, like, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to move away from home if I
yeah,
want to get the sort of job that I want to get. So, luckily for us, it doesn't involve moving to America. We can move somewhere else in the country. We can move to another country, and we have a lot more equality, a lot more independence. But going back to the 1940s, yeah, these women really didn't have as that. They did have this period
yeah,
during World War II when they could be an important part of the workforce, but a lot of them had seen what had happened after the World War One, where where a lot of women had jobs, and then suddenly they were cast aside once all the men returned.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
yeah. So for any women, I think a woman today as much as for a woman in the 1940s. You kind of you want to broaden your prospects as much as you can, and you want to go and have a better life than your parents did, and often that does mean moving away, seeking new opportunities. So I don't think that's changed, but I do think that what we have today is a lot more options.
Yeah.
No.
And it's sort of, again, like you said, it's sort of easier because we have phones and we can video call and we can send an instant message. It's not a case of waiting for the mail to do its job.
Yeah.
And back then it was incredibly slow.
Yeah.
So I feel like in this instance we're lucky.
You're
But
giving it
for
more
them,
credit
would have
than it
been...
deserves now. It's still incredibly
It's
slow.
true,
It
honestly.
might
It's
have
still
actually got
incredibly slow.
downhill.
It's got worse.
It's gotten worse. You're giving it more credit than it deserves.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite war bride story, Hattie? Do you have like one that is always sticking in your mind and kind of has you like feeling that old romantic kind of way?
I think that the most touching one that I've read, it didn't actually occur in the war. So I like to call this woman, she's the oldest GI bride. So we had the earliest, which was the case of Forrest Dowling and him marrying a British woman. But then you have in the 1980s, the late 1980s, 1988, there's a woman from Britain. Her name was Betty McCarb. She was from Scotland originally, but her and her family had moved down to Corby. I think it's in Northamptonshire, just before the war. And it was at Corby where she met an American. So this was during the war. I think this was 1944. And so she met an American called Robert Bennett, who was serving with the 401st Bomb Group at Deanthorpe. And the pair were friends during the war. There was kind of a spark between them, but they never really took it any further. Robert would often come to Betty's house and have dinner with their family. They'd go on like kind of nice romantic days out. But then he was posted over to Europe and then back to America, and they kind of lost contact. And she moved on with her life. She got married. He never actually got married, and he said it was because every time he would go on a date with a girl, all he could think about was Betty, and he's just thinking, oh, what could have been. So then, once he'd retired, he decided to go on a trip back to England. He went for a 2-week vacation, and he decided to look up Betty, see if she was still in the local area. He assumed that she'd be married, wouldn't really be interested in him. But she'd actually been widowed quite young, so she'd had two grown-up children, and they really struck it off again. They quickly realised that actually they wanted to get married. Like they missed the opportunity the first time round. So this was in the 1970s. So they set the date, and they planned to get married in the local church. But as we know, with the local church in the Church of England, you have to get your banns read for I think 3 weekends. And she was really dedicated to getting married in her church. But he had to go back to the US for whatever. He was only in the UK for 2 weeks, and I don't know if they had a little argument or something. But she basically called it off and said, "Oh well, I guess we just won't get married then." So he went back to the States. And then he was absolutely heartbroken. And then a few days later, he got a letter from Betty, but he was too heartbroken to read it. So he just put it in the drawer, locked it away for 11 years until 1988. I know.
Oh my God.
And then he found the letter and was like, oh, okay, I'll open it, see what she had to say. And of course, she was like, oh, I've been such an idiot. Let's get married. Like, come on, like, let's do it now. But yeah, and so he never realised. So 11 years later, he was like, oh no, I missed my chance again. And so he decides to find her phone number, makes a long distance phone call, and she picks up, and he expects her to be completely mad at him. And she just assumed that he didn't actually want anything to do with her after he read the letter and just never returned it. But again, they kind of hit it off again. They put all of that beside them, to the side, and they decide they are going to get married. So this time, Robert goes over to Corby, and he's like, right, you're coming with me, brings her back to the US, and they get married there in 1988, by which time they're both in their 70s, I think. And yeah, and so they do have a happy I think 20 years together. I think they live quite long lives in the States. So yeah, it was really sweet. It's kind of sad because they could have had their whole life together, but love has a way.
It's very sweet, and obviously they were supposed to end up together, but if that is not the most
Right?
male thing to do
Oh,
is to
please.
stick a letter in a drawer and
I know.
ignore it
A
and then
boy.
find it and say, oh yeah, I'm gonna read it now. Like, come on, I've been doing this for a decade. Oh yeah, I feel
Oh
ready
God.
now. Oh my God, yeah, a boy. Even though
Yeah.
he
boy.
obviously grew up into a great man, he is still
Wow.
a
Yeah.
boy.
I know. Poor old Betty.
Wow.
She's
She
yeah,
was
but
hanging
she
on and
found a
It
way.
waiting.
really does make you
Yeah.
believe, but it really does like I really am like such an old romantic because like, here he is
Yeah.
stuffing the letter in the drawer and you're like, you want to be mad at him, but you're like, but it's so romantic.
But it's
It's so
so
sweet. Love finds a way, love prevails. It does.
yeah.
Even though he was a boy and he didn't,
Mm.
he
Oh
wasted 10
Yeah.
God.
years, but oh my
But
gosh.
it does make for a good
That
story.
is
And
It
so
I think that
does.
must be
It
sweet.
the
does.
last GI Bride. So yeah,
Yeah, the
and
last
Last GI
official
Bride.
war bride.
Wow.
Oh,
yeah.
that's
Oh,
So that's my favorite
adorable.
story. Just
Oh,
something a
I
bit
love
different. But there
that.
are so many anecdotes. And if anyone
Yeah.
has an access to a newspaper archive subscription, just type in GI Bride and you find so many cool stories. And
yeah.
there were stories not really written about in newspapers, but if you go onto Ancestry, you have a look in the census data, you can find out that a lot of these marriages did end in heartbreak, unfortunately. So, as one example, I
Mm.
was looking at of a British woman who married someone who was in the quartermasters. I can't remember the name of the unit, but they're basically, yeah, in the quartermasters. They were driving a truck around all of the different airfields, and they ended up getting married. It wasn't maybe the best match, just looking back on
Mm.
it, because from the newspaper record for the marriage in the British newspapers, I think he may have elevated his status a little bit more than he was. He's kind of described as a sergeant when in fact he was a private, and he says he went to
Oh.
college, which I don't think he did. So that might have been part of the reason why it didn't all work out when she eventually got over to the States. They also had a child while he was still in England, so she went over with the son. They ended up having a couple more kids as well. But then in the 1950 census, I realised she's not on the census, and then I have records for her being back in the UK. So, yeah, and
Oh.
again, shipping
Wow.
records are
Wow.
really interesting because they can show the comings and goings of these women
Yeah.
in the post-war years. So yeah, I don't know why it didn't work out, but that was such a common story for a lot of these marriages. A lot of times the women were just maybe had ideas of what their life would be like. Perhaps they were slightly tinted spectacles looking at the Hollywood lifestyle that they'd seen in the
Yeah.
movies, and then in reality it wasn't quite like that. Or for a lot of them, they just missed home, which is completely understandable.
Yeah.
A lot of these were young women, they'd never been away from home, and then suddenly they're in a foreign country, completely detached from their family. So yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't surprise me that a lot of the marriages failed. But yeah,
Yeah.
luckily the vast majority of them did succeed, and you can trace them all the way to the end of their lives, and they're still in the US, and they were happily married. And it's amazing when you this is the interviews as well, because the women seem to pick up an American accent so quickly. And yeah,
Mm.
a lot of the women they just completely immerse themselves into their new communities,
Yeah.
and they were actually told at the time before going over there that they had to be friendly, because Americans value friendliness above all else, so they couldn't be
Yeah.
reserved and shy and English. They had to put themselves out there and be part of the community, which a lot of the women did, and I think it did help them to integrate.
Oh, for sure.
How's
Yeah.
that American accent working out for you, Winnie?
Yeah,
Not
yes.
very well. Not very
Hey.
well. Like when I speak to people here, I'm told I still sound very English. When I speak
Hmm.
to my friends over in England, they tell me I sound really American, and
Ah,
I don't hear it. I think it's because my kids are growing up here, so I sort of adapt to how they're speaking.
how many years have you been over there now, Winnie?
uh, eight, eight and a bit.
Oh,
Yeah, quite a
that's
while.
quite a long
And I
time.
haven't I haven't been back home since. So I'm
It is
overdue
crazy.
a visit.
You are really
Yeah.
living like the GI Bride experience, because for a lot of
Yeah.
those women, they
I'm
wouldn't have
just
been
not
able to go
going
back.
home.
No,
Yeah.
this is
Just
it
not
now.
going home. I would like to. I think I'm over it here now.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it. I've had enough.
I think that is just a great place to kind of put a bow on the War Brides, as a whole.
Mm.
And if any of our listeners have any stories of their own, right? If you are a grandchild or a child of maybe a man and wife who came over and the woman was from Britain, and you have a story, we would love to hear it. You can contact us on Facebook, you can contact us on Instagram, and we just would love to hear your story if you have one. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. And a huge thank you, Hattie. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a blast.
It's
Yeah,
always
I'm
fun
so
hanging
glad.
out with you.
It's always
We
fun.
do always have a great time. So, and we do
Thank you,
promise
everyone,
to
for
come
listening.
visit soon and hang out at the
Yes,
museum.
yeah.
We do. We're gonna come over soon and hang out at the museum.
Yeah, we will do an 8th Air Force tour.
Yeah.
Can you get us into the
Just us
B-17?
three.
I reckon I can sneak you in. Yeah,
Yes.
enough notice.
It'll be my second B-17 that I've been in.
Show
And
off.
oh my
nice.
goodness.
Yeah.
That
What
thing
was the
is
first
small.
one?
Show
was
off. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you, Hattie, for hanging out with us again. We really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
we will catch all of you on the next one.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.